Thank you so much and good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's National Conference of State Legislatures webinar, GMOs, a Recipe for a New Label, where we will discuss one of the hottest public policy topics, GMOs and GMO labeling. My name is Ben Hush, and I am the Senior Committee Director for NCSL's Natural Resources and Infrastructure Committee. Today's webinar is part of the NRI Committee's 2016 Spring Webinar Series, where the committee hosts a new webinar every other Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m. Eastern. Our next and unfortunately final webinar will be on June 23rd and will focus on distributed solar energy. For a complete schedule, recordings of our previous webinars from our 2016 series, and registration details, please visit our website at www.ncsl.org. For today's webinar, we are going to delve into the very timely and important issue of GMOs and GMO labeling. Unfortunately, consumers in both the United States and abroad continue to receive conflicting information about genetically engineered crops. Proponents tout the benefits, while opponents emphasize potential risks. Additionally, as these crops continue to make up a larger percentage of the United States food supply, the question of whether or even how to update food labeling requirements continues to be discussed at both the state and federal government levels. To help provide some context and updates on both the impacts of GMOs as well as possible legislative and regulatory changes, we are joined today by two great speakers. Before I introduce them though, just a couple quick logistical notes. Our webinar is being recorded and registrants will be able to access a recording of the webinar and the slides on our website. It will be posted on the same web page that you used to register for today's webinar, but we will also send around a link to everyone afterwards. But if you can't wait that long to get your hands on the slides, you can actually download them right now as I'm speaking by looking at the top right-hand portion of your screen and clicking on the icon that has a yellow piece of paper with a blue bar graph on top of it. From there, you will see our resources library with the slides, which you can actually download right now. I know you all will have a lot of great questions for our presenters, so we will hold a Q&A after both of them have completed. The Q&A will be held through our chat box, which is on the lower left-hand side of your screen, so please feel free to type your questions in there at any time during the presentations. So with all the rules out of the way, let's hear from our presenters. First up is Dr. Fred Gould, co-director of the Genetic Engineering and Society Center at North Carolina State University, where he studies ecology and genetics of insect pests to improve food production and human and environmental health. Additionally, he served as chair for the recently released report from the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine that examined genetically engineered crops and the many issues surrounding them. Prior to this, Dr. Gould was first appointed to the National Academy of Sciences in 2011 and has authored more than 180 publications. With that, the floor is yours, Dr. Gould.
All right, thank you very much. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you folks today, and the first slide, as you see, is some perspectives on the meaning and impacts of GMOs. All right, and what I'm really going to be talking to you about a lot is this report that you just heard about that was released on May 17th, Genetically Engineered Crops, Experiences, and Prospects. So looking at the crops that have already been released and used since 1996 and where we may be going in the future. All right, and this was a committee activity. 20 people were on this committee, and if you can see that in the slide, it ranged from people like myself who are in entomology to molecular biology, lawyers, sociologists, plant breeders. So we had a very large contingent to write this report that was almost 400 pages long with over 1,000 references. And it was sponsored by groups, you can see on the bottom here, the Burroughs Wellcome Fund and others that were not associated with biotechnology products. I have a little less than 20 minutes to tell you about this very long report. So what I want to give you up front is to tell you that we have a website that enables you to search around in the report, both for what is in the report as well as how we developed the report. And this just shows you one picture of the active website where you can look at public meetings or webinars we heard. We heard from 80 people with very different perspectives, everyone from Greenpeace to some of the companies who are producing those things. So you can see their presentations to us and how we use that information. We also have interfaces with the readers, so you can look at every one of our findings and recommendations, and there's a place where you see the blue type on your screen where you can click on that and go to just the place that explains how we came up with a specific finding. So if you're interested in a specific aspect of health effects, you can click on that and not have to go through all 400 pages of the report. We also received 700 comments from people in the public, and we summarize those comments. So you can go to a concern that somebody has or you have and see how we address those concerns. Further, some people are not very comfortable with data that came from industry or from advocacy groups. So for the report in terms of the currently available genetically engineered crops in terms of their health safety, in terms of agronomic effects, and in terms of socioeconomic effects, we looked at every one of the papers and have here on the website the affiliation of the author and the funding source whenever we could find it. So if you are looking through the report, you could see if you don't trust a certain source, you could see whether that's where it came from. All right, so I'd like to move on from that to give you this brief presentation of what we found. And here it is, a key message after 400 pages, is really there's no longer a clear distinction between crop improvement approaches. And this is an important message, and that's, it says here, new technologies in genetic engineering and conventional breeding are blurring the distinction between the two approaches, and it gives some examples, and I'll get to that. And that also that people wanted us to say, are GE crops all safe, or are they problematic, or whatever, and we could not make any sweeping generalizations about them, and I hope I'll explain why. And also that all technologies for improving plant genetics have the potential to change foods in a way that would raise a safety question, not just the transgenic crops. And I just want to, move a little bit quickly to just say this is what's grown today. All right, GE crops are planted on 12% of the world's croplands, and 40% of all the GE crops are in the U.S. All right, and if you look across the bottom, you see that maize, soybean, cotton, canola, sugar beet, there are 12 different crops that have been genetically engineered, but for the most part, what's grown is maize, soybean, and cotton. And you can see that the United States has 10 of the 12 crops, but China has genetically engineered poplar trees that are only in China, and BT eggplant is only planted right now in Bangladesh. So there are lots of reasons why specific crops are grown in only specific nations. Some of them are agronomic, but others have to do with culture. So Mexico has genetically engineered cotton and genetically engineered soybean, but no genetically engineered maize for cultural reasons. So what I want to move to, though, is, okay, what is this genetically engineered crops, GMOs? And typically in 1996, we were talking about transgenic crops. And this diagram is just giving you this briefing. Basically, people's perspectives and what was going on was you're using an agrobacterium to move a gene from some organism into a crop plant and having it expressed. Okay, so I want to get to the fact that, okay, what you're doing is you're moving foreign DNA into a chromosome. And this is how, this is just showing you human chromosomes to get us oriented, that these are your sets of chromosomes, and they all come in duplicates, right? So your diploid organisms, you have two copies of each chromosome. And there's a reason why I'm showing you this. I'll get to this as we move along. This is showing corn chromosomes, a little bit less of a cartoon, but actually pictures of them. And they, too, have two copies of each chromosome. All right, so to simplify this into a cartoon form and explain about breeding, you see I'm only showing one pair of chromosomes, okay? And you're seeing here conventional breeding and how it would be done. You see a current cultivar All right, and we're just looking at one of, let's say, the 10 chromosomes, but just to give you an idea, you cross that with a wild relative to move a new trait in. So let's say you have red tomatoes, you want to get a yellow tomato, you go to the Andes Mountains, you find a wild relative that's yellow, and you want to move the gene for being yellow into your cultivar. So you cross them, you get offspring that have genes from both the red and the black, and then you cross that back to the black ones, which are your current cultivars, until you only move in the genes for that yellow color. So over time, if you're selecting for those, you keep losing the other parts of the genes until hopefully you have a new cultivar that is all black, is all like the initial cultivar, but has that blue gene that you wanted that makes the tomatoes yellow. All right? So that would be conventional breeding. That's how that would be done. So in 1996, when we were talking about the first genetically engineered crops, this was done very differently. So you had, again, your current cultivar, that's the two black lines, the two copies of one chromosome in that. And what you're doing is you're trying to move a beneficial gene from some unrelated organism. Again, it's the blue gene, the one you want. You put it on a plasmid and you put it in a bacteria that I was showing you. You integrate that into the crop, and then you're left with that new cultivar with the new gene inserted somewhere within the chromosomes of that plant. All right? So this is what we had in 1996. Today we have that and more. So there's something that's not called transgenic, but cisgenic. And actually that has properties of both the conventional and the transgenesis, where let's say you find that yellow tomato gene in the Andes Mountains, instead of going through the whole process of back crossing it in every generation down to probably at least 8 generations to get just that trait and not the other characteristics from the Andes Mountains tomatoes, here you take that trait from those Andes Mountains tomatoes that makes it yellow, put it into a transfer agent, and move that straight in. So you haven't really added anything but tomato DNA to the new crop. And beyond that, so here's just another picture of the transgenic, right, where you're moving a foreign gene into your apple here, not tomato. Cisgenic, where you're moving an apple gene into an apple. And then what they call intragenetic, where you're not moving anything foreign into the apple. You're just changing the DNA code base pair by base pair to get something that you're synthesizing. All right, so that we've moved from a situation where you could say, okay, I either have a transgenic crop or I have conventional breeding. And now we have a whole continuum, and that continuum is getting broader and broader. So as we said, there's more and more overlap because of that. So to move into our report itself, the first thing we were looking at were the crops that we have right now. And in this case, we only really have mostly maize, cotton, and soybean, for which we have information. And there are really two traits. One is resistance to insects, the BT crops, and the other is herbicide resistance. In terms of the insect resistance, we see a reduction in yield loss from the insect pests, which makes sense. We see significant decrease in the use of synthetic insecticide. And we also see higher insect biodiversity in the plantings that have the BT crops than in the ones where you don't have the BT but you use synthetic insecticides. If you're doing more natural control or you're not doing control at all, you'd have the same biodiversity as with the BT crops. And there's a problem, though, with these things is that they've been used, but they've been overused, and if they're not done appropriately, you sometimes get insects that have become resistant. And that's happened recently in India with their cotton crop, and it's been real problematic. So with herbicide resistance, it's a different kind of trait, and it typically doesn't lead to higher yield, but it gives farmers more flexibility. And that too seems to has been overused and improperly used and has led to resistance to glyphosate, the one herbicide that most of the crops are resistant to. And we talk a lot about how, we really need to go back to integrated pest management. I think I'm not with you anymore.
You're still here.
I'm still with you? Okay.
Yep.
Somebody else is going to have to change to the next slide and tell me what that
You just let me know when to change the slide.
Okay. What slide is it? This is going to be a little complicated. All right. What slide are you on right now?
Herbicide use in cotton, maize, and soybeans.
All right. Please go ahead to the next slide. I'll try to pull this up on my own.
Experiences, agronomic, and environmental effects.
Okay. All right, I'm going to just make sure I have it in front of myself and then have you change that. Okay. All right, so you're talking about the herbicide tolerance, and the slide after that shows you herbicide use. Some people have, you have 3 lines in that graph, and some people say that herbicide use has gone up, gone down, or not changed, and it depends on the crop that you're talking about. But the report makes a major comment that people talk about that all the time, but it's not very useful to know how many pounds of herbicide is used. You really need more detailed data on the herbicide itself and how toxic it is, both to the environment and to people. And so if you replace a environmentally bad herbicide with a good one, even if you use more pounds, that's an advantage. All right, the next slide. Our general findings was that gene flow, which people had worried about a lot, has occurred, but it hasn't been shown to cause any harmful environmental effects. Also, we couldn't find any cause and effect relationship between GE crops and environmental problems. And finally, a very important thing is that on one side, there's arguments that it's hurt the environment and all of that, and then the other side, it's the GE crops are going to save the world by feeding everybody. So we went through the USDA data, and we find no evidence from the USDA data that genetic engineering has increased the rate at which U.S. crop yields are increasing. And I'll explain that on the next slide. It shows 3 graphs, one for maize, for cotton, and for soybean. And it shows the rate at which yields have been increasing in the United States from 1981 till 1996, where that pink line, that vertical line is. And you can see how they've been increasing. And then since 1996, when the genetically engineered crops came out, and you can see that the slope of that line hasn't changed. What was promised, and what you see in some of the literature, is that, that slope is going to increase. And so far, that hasn't happened. If you go back, people will tell you that there shouldn't have been an expectation for that increase. But it's important when people are talking about how important it is to go with GE crops, that there are other things to consider. All right, I just want to talk about the health effects. We looked at a number of kinds of health effects. We didn't just use the old studies that were out there. We went back to the original literature, and there were 4 different things that we looked at. Data from 4 different kinds of studies. Any one of them alone would have been deficient, but when you put the data together from all of them, they lead to the conclusion that there are no differences in the safety of the genetically engineered crops compared to conventionally bred crops. And, we looked at the studies with animals, and not only were the studies with animals that show an effect problematic, some of the ones that don't show an effect are problematic. We go into a lot of detail in that. We look at the long-term effects on health and feed convergency in livestock, and we don't see any impacts. We don't see any change in nutrient and chemical composition. But we also did something by looking at epidemiological data on a lot of health issues, chronic health issues, with the question of, in the United States and Canada, where genetically engineered crops were being eaten, compared to the United Kingdom and Western Europe, where they weren't eaten, do we see a different pattern in the change of some of these chronic diseases? And we found no evidence of that. So the main conclusion was that there's no persuasive evidence of adverse health effects. But we also bring up the caveat that it's always hard to find subtle favorable or adverse effects. It could be there's reason to expect some genetically engineered crops to be better for health, but we could find that no evidence of that either. But what we say is that, with not just genetically engineered crops, but plenty of things in your diet, subtle effects are hard. How much salt should you really be eating? These are things that keep changing because it's hard to get the data. So in terms of experience in social and economic effects, for the most part, these have been favorable for producers, but there's high heterogeneity. For some people, it hasn't been so good. For small-scale farmers, early adopters have done well, but it's not, again, clear that once these become embedded in the markets, whether the small-scale poor farmers will benefit, and we could talk about that. I want to just move through this to the next stage of our report was on the novel genetically engineered crops. What's going to happen now that we have all these new technologies I just mentioned? We expect that instead of just 3 crops as the main ones and those 12 that I showed you, that this is going to broaden out considerably because it will be so much easier to do the genetic engineering. So especially for insect traits and diseases, we'll be developing crops that are resistant. But in terms of increasing yields, we saw a lot of uncertainty. This idea that you're going to increase photosynthetic efficiency and nitrogen use, that's very far off. And we basically call for basic public investment to be balanced between genetically engineered approaches and others. And in terms of regulation, next slide, diverse regulatory approaches, we just recognize that the regulatory approaches are not just science-based, whether in the United States or anywhere else. They should be informed by science, but they really mirror the broader social and cultural differences between nations, and that we don't see that these regulatory models are going to be harmonized anytime soon. Next slide on regulation should be based on novelty. I think we go back to an old thing from the National Academies in the 1980s, that it is the product, not the process, that should be regulated. And we basically say that now when there are really a merging of the technologies of conventional breeding and genetically engineered approaches, that it's even harder to defend the use of a process to determine how you regulate. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but we bring up new technologies that have come about that can actually fingerprint the characteristics of a plant, and that you should use a tiered approach that uses these new what are called omics technologies to determine if there are any potential safety issues with those crops. And I will thank you all and leave it there. This is the site for the Genetic Engineering Crops Report, and you can get a lot more information there. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Gould. That was a really useful overview of many of the issues. And again, just as a reminder to folks listening, we will hold Q&A at the end, but please feel free to ask your questions at any time by typing them into the chat box in the lower left-hand side of the screen. And for the person who did email me their question, I did get it, and I will make sure to ask it after John's presentation. So our next speaker, John Dillard, who is an associate attorney with OFW Law, will walk us through the current legislative landscape at the state and national level. At OFW, John concentrates his practice on agricultural, environmental, and food-related issues, and has represented clients in many complex matters, including the Clean Water Act, food labeling, biotech seed patenting, and food recalls. He also advises on compliance with state and federal antitrust laws, and he also publishes a blog, an agriculture blog, Ag in the Courtroom, which is featured on agweb.com. And I personally also highly recommend following John on Twitter to stay up to date on the latest from the courtroom involving agriculture. So with that, John, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you, Ben, and thank you, everybody, for participating and giving me an opportunity to speak. So I'm going to go through kind of what the state of play is right now with GMO labeling, and it really centers on Vermont and reacting to Vermont. So the state of Vermont has really gotten the attention of the food industry in the last year or so. So the law, Act 120, is at this point the only GMO labeling law that's actually set to go in effect. It's set to go in effect on July 1. And in terms of the mechanics of it, on any packaged goods, you're going to have a label that's the size. If you have a can of soda or some type of food product, if you look on the nutrition facts, it has to say in text at least the size of serving size on the nutrition facts panel, or if you look at the ingredient list, they can use something the same size as something on the ingredient list. In that case, it would have to be bold, and basically providing a disclosure either depending on the level of GMO content in their produced with genetic engineering, if it's 75% or more biotech content, if it's less than 75%, but you know for sure that you're dealing with a product that contains genetically engineered content, it can say partially produced with genetic engineering. And kind of a cover in case you can't verify or aren't sure or you don't care whether you label or if you don't want to, if you don't know that the product contains genetically engineered content, but it may, it has to be labeled may be produced with genetic engineering. The act is going to be enforced by the Vermont Attorney General's office. They're assessing the actual enforcement is not has been waived until January 1 of 2017, unless they're going against a manufacturer that is shipping product without labels in bad faith. A really weird quirk in this law, and one that's very disruptive. I mean, I understand from a legislative perspective, not wanting to punish the retailers for this, but a very tough quirk in this law is that the law is assessed against a product's manufacturer. And this is problematic because the manufacturer does not actually have control over where his products or where their products are sold or not sold. Another thing making this extremely problematic, and I'm working as we speak, like while Dr. Gould was speaking, I'm working on an issue related to Act 120. The Vermont Attorney General's office, the office that's in charge of enforcing this, does not have the resources to provide any assistance beyond putting up a website and holding from time to time an occasional seminar. So if you actually have a question about complying with this law, and it's not one that's common enough to be found in the FAQ section of their website, good luck. So there's definitely going to be a lot of lessons learned over the next few months, and I know that some of you are in the legislature, or I know a lot of you are legislators or work with legislative staff at the state level, and so I know this law is being actively considered in a number of legislatures. And so my advice, I'm not going to lie and say I'm impartial about this, but just some things to pay attention to as you go through with it. The Center for Food Safety is my understanding is the group that, as well as the Consumer Union, it's a group that's been pushing the model legislation. It's the legislation that's been adopted in Vermont, in Maine, in Connecticut. I think it's what's being considered in Massachusetts right now, as well as the failed state initiatives. Some of the things that we've learned in Vermont is, some real issues with the law. If you're selling it to your constituents, or if you're one thing I think the consumers out there are going to be confused by is right now the Federal Meat Inspection Act, the Poultry Products Inspection Act, the Egg Products Inspection Act, all strictly preempt state labeling measures on USDA inspected products. So anything that's inspected by FSIS is automatically is not amenable to a state labeling measure. So this accounts for about, the figure I've heard is about 40% of canned goods are not going to be labeled or are not going to be subject to mandatory labeling under any type of state measure. Another thing that we've discovered through litigation is that the natural labeling prohibition, so the prohibition on labeling any products contain GE content as natural, has been deemed unconstitutional as a restriction on free speech. Another issue with the actual legislation was it didn't provide for any type of tolerance on GMO content, which is really behind the industry standards of the countries that actually ban genetically engineered content, and certainly the countries that require labeling. Kind of the international standard is 0.9% GMO content. Now that was written into the regulations, but that's another issue with the actual model legislation itself. Another practical matter that we're discovering, or that's becoming apparent, is if you don't have the resources to set national policy, it's perhaps a good idea to reconsider. The Attorney General's office has, I've had discussions with several that were privy to some of the details of meetings with the Attorney General's office. I know this is not a knock on Vermont's Attorney General's office, but just apparently not enough kind of subject matter expertise on the food industry. Some very basic things have been overlooked in terms of the logistics and understanding how the modern food system works in terms of distribution. There are a lot of different things that were overlooked and have been issues to work out. And I'll reiterate, the number one frustration is Vermont's Attorney General's office is not making itself available for any type of questions from the people that they'll be actually enforcing the law against, which is frustrating, to say the least. Another thing that we're discovering is that companies are voluntarily complying with this law on a national basis, just to make sure that it's not something where they'll face liability in Vermont. And it's been interesting to see how kind of some of the different companies do approach this matter, and it could be possible that in the end nobody really cares, and so that's something that's going to continue to play out. In terms of so I've laid out kind of some of the problems, and the big problem here, beyond do you actually need a label? I think it's becoming more apparent with the more research that's coming out that a label is clunky and unnecessary if your real issue is pesticides. there are other ways to get at that. Or if your real issue is organic, you can go out and there are a number of alternatives, and I think this is really a push, especially by the organic industry, to kind of stigmatize biotechnology, and it's not a productive discussion. But as a practical matter, the bigger issue is having a 50-state framework of these types of laws, and having the risk is, right now companies are complying, the ones that are voluntarily complying are meeting the Vermont standard, and there's a real concern that, another state could come up with a standard that's not consistent with that. So there is a real need for some type of federal preemption, some type of federal approach to this, because, it's part of interstate commerce. That's really what the federal government's role is in this. And so last fall, or last year, I think it's actually last summer, the House took up a measure that basically it was kind of a comprehensive approach to biotechnology. First off, it preempted state labeling laws. It also it did not have any type of mandatory labeling component to it. It also actually codified a lot of the biotech crop approval process. So it actually, I think, on the ground in terms of what different companies go through to get their crops approved, probably would not change under this, but a lot of actions that are done right now are done voluntarily, and so it would have codified that. One of the more controversial portions of it was kind of setting standards for what qualified for a non-GMO labeling claim. That passed the House with a pretty big margin that was fairly bipartisan, and it's gone to the Senate, and that's been about the last we've heard from it. The Senate has taken a different approach. A different approach to this. We understand, or it's my understanding from the discussions, that whatever the Senate puts out is going to be what carries the day. The primary component of the Senate bill is first off a preemption of state labeling laws, and then there's going to be a heavy emphasis on disclosure. We can't tell right now, or it's not apparent right now what exactly is going to come out of the Senate, because the Republican, or the majority and minority leader and their staff are working, from my understanding, working pretty closely on this issue to try to hammer out something that can eventually get 60 votes on the floor. Senator Roberts put out a proposal that had an emphasis on voluntary disclosure, and it would remain voluntary if 70% of the most commonly consumed foods in the country were subject or had voluntary GMO labels or had non-GMO labels. So if 70% of what they deemed to be commonly consumed foods had some type of disclosure about GE content or lack of GE content, then that would meet the standard. If under Senator Roberts' approach, if the 70% was not met, then there would be a triggering clause. There's a triggering clause that will require mandatory labeling on food products. That approach failed. It didn't get, I think it only got 46 votes, or it fell short of what they needed to get past cloture. And so we're awaiting the Democratic alternative, or whatever they can work out as a compromise. I think it came out on Monday that there are 3 sticking points in the discussions, and I'm not privy to what the sticking points are. But if I had to guess, I've kind of got here a list of kind of the issues that are in contention, are going to remain. Probably, somebody's going to walk away unhappy. Senator Stabenow, who's on the majority or on the minority ranking member, has made clear that she can't get the votes out unless there is some form of mandatory disclosure. So I would not be surprised if what eventually resulted was a mandatory labeling regime. The next issue is what form of disclosure is there, or will there be? The people kind of pushing this, the anti-GMO crowd, wants something basically stating produced with genetic engineering, very similar to what there is in Vermont. I know what's been discussed in kind of the what was favored by Senator Roberts was allowing companies the option, and this is also something pushed by Secretary Vilsack, allowing companies some type of option of having like a QR code to where if they were interested, they could scan the packaging with their smartphone and look up information about the product that way, or providing a phone number. Another option that's been thrown out there is having some type of icon. I have there what I have there on the slide is actually an example of what Brazil uses for disclosing genetically engineered content. So that's one of the fights that's definitely going on. The other issue that is out there, and this was kind of raised by Dr. Gould, is defining what is bioengineered, defining what is genetically modified. A lot of the discussion has been on transgenic crops, so that means taking genes from one crop or one plant or one bacteria and inserting it into a crop. But right now, through gene marker technology, we're doing, or plant scientists and plant breeders are doing a lot of cool stuff without bringing in DNA from another crop, just optimizing the genes that are already available in a crop. And so determining whether that would be considered genetically engineered or not is an issue. And then another issue, and I'm not sure it's one of the sticking points, is kind of any type of accommodations for small producers. I do think that we will see something. It may not be by July 1st, but I do think that we'll, or it may not be passed by July 1st, but I do think that we will have some type of preemption that comes out that will hopefully be a little bit clearer on how to comply with it than what Vermont has or what other states may push through. There is also, and it's not receiving near a lot of attention, there is also a lawsuit that's going on. It was filed by GMA, National Association of Manufacturers, and the International Dairy Foods Association, basically challenging on a constitutional basis Vermont's Act 120, or the First Amendment, the Commerce Clause, and federal preemption, so the Supremacy Clause. That lawsuit, the district court ruled on it. They did rule that the GMO labeling mandate was constitutional. They did, kind of as I discussed at the beginning, They discussed preemption for USDA-inspected products. So Vermont conceded on that argument after they got into it, but the court held clearly that USDA-inspected products are not subject to labeling. And unlike the GMO labeling disclosure, the court held that the prohibition on using the words natural on any product containing GE content was considered unconstitutional. They had basically a food industry appealed to the Second Circuit. Oral arguments were heard in October 2015, and we still don't have a decision yet, which is tells me that the court's going to kind of let everybody sort this out, or hopefully it gets sorted out outside of having to decide on a lot of constitutional issues. So with that, that's kind of my update, and I'll turn it back over to Ben and Tricia, and ready. I think me and Dr. Gould are ready to take any questions that you have.
Great. Thank you so much, John. Obviously, a lot to follow in kind of the very short term. And we do now have time for a few questions. I'm going to lead with one that was sent to me actually over email, but if you do have a question, please use the chat box in the lower left-hand side that you can see on your screen. And as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and we will make it available to participants. So this first question is actually kind of for both Dr. Gould and John. And to paraphrase what was emailed to me, Dr. Gould, there was, and rightly so, a good bit of science as part of your presentation. How do you kind of overcome the technical and scientific aspects so that it is, kind of, I guess, boiled down, if you will, and explainable to the general public exactly what genetically engineering is, and so that they understand how it pertains to their food?
Well, that's a tough one, actually. I mean, and you can see I started my presentation by just showing you chromosomes. And, when people are asked these questions about what do they think about eating genetically modified organisms, they think about the genes that have been put into them. And sometimes the answer is about their normal food is that there aren't genes in those natural foods. Of course there are. But the level of understanding varies dramatically among the public, and I think it's our obligation to help to explain these things to them. I'm not sure if I'm getting exactly at your question. I would say that one of the things that's coming out of our report is a thick technical document, and the National Academy has decided that in the next year they're going to come out what they call derivative products, things that are more accessible to public audiences. I should say that just last week, the British Royal Society came out with a booklet that has simpler to understand answers. I don't have the URL right with me, but it's pretty accessible. I bet if you just Google Royal Society and GMOs, you could come up with it.
John, I didn't know if you had any thoughts?
I think there is a real challenge in terms of educating consumers. I do think for policymakers, it is important to understand kind of get a good understanding of kind of the forces behind this. And I don't like fights in the food industry because I want to represent everybody that I can in the food industry, but it's important to understand that the money from this is coming from the organic industry, which has a lot to benefit from the stigmatization of biotechnology. Also, if you look at and I have nothing wrong with the organic industry going out and making a dollar, but it's important to understand where a lot of this push is coming from. There's also a certain anti-corporate push to this. So I think a very simple story to explain why biotechnology is good and has the potential for doing a lot of good is explain the story of the rainbow papaya in Hawaii. That's a situation where you don't have a lot of, nobody's going out and making a lot of money, or you don't have like a big corporation selling a particular product and all the people they're afraid of black helicopters going on and on about it. That's just a simple thing where they had a problem is a disease that was wiping out their crop, and made a simple genetic modification, and they're able to save the crop. And I think that is probably the story that I would tell to explain biotechnology and why it's good and why it has potential for the future. I do think that a lot of these studies, like especially the National Academy of Sciences report, very good, but I think it's important to make sure that is digestible and understandable for the general public. I was very pleased to see a number of kind of popular publications or newspapers and news programs on TV that were able to kind of take that information and turn it around for the general public. So.
Great, thanks. Dr. Gould, this next question is for you. You kind of ended your presentation talking about how, given some of these new methods for transferring genes, there's kind of the expectation to see, some newer developments with crops. And you talked a lot about, especially kind of in regards to the Americas with maize, cotton, soybeans. But I didn't know, if you were aware or had, in kind of your research for the report, any other crops that we might expect to either significantly benefit from GE or those that maybe have not been genetically engineered to kind of come onto the commercial market as kind of new GE products within the relatively near future?
Yeah, well, there are actually some that are right in the pipeline now. And I guess I would just point out genetically engineered rice is something that is coming along. Both in terms of insect protection. These kind of things are in the research plot stage, but more so what people call golden rice, which has higher beta carotene content, which is good for fighting vitamin A deficiency. And that's being tested at the International Rice Research Institute. So when that comes out, it will not have a price tag on it. So I guess, those kinds of things are being developed. I think there's a lot of effort being put into cassava, chickpea, but not at the same level as has been put into the crops where there really is a big profit to be made. So a lot of these are sponsored by philanthropic organizations and done by government employees, in terms of universities and such. So there are new things coming along, and I would just say I didn't get into all of the new technologies, and I know that's very technical, but it's becoming much simpler to do these kinds of genetic engineering feats. And it's going to hopefully be the case that some of these can be done outside the developed world.
Great, thank you. And going back to you, John, we actually just got a question in the chat box. I guess referring to, you talked a lot about Vermont, but are you familiar with any other counties or municipalities, say local government, that has attempted to enact GMO labeling requirements?
No, I'm not aware of any kind of local ordinances on this. I know there have been some counties, couple counties in California and in Oregon that have banned or attempted to ban the cultivation of genetically engineered crops. But in terms of having a local labeling requirement, I'm not currently aware of that.
Great, and kind of continuing along, I guess another legal question, if you will. You mentioned that the Vermont law goes into effect this July, but enforcement, more or less, will start January 1st of next year. You talked a little bit about being unsure of exactly when the appeals court would rule. Is there an anticipation that it will be sometime this year, or after enforcement begins in January 1st of next year?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. I'd say it's really hard to. It's hard to guess when an appeals court is going to rule on something. I followed another an FDA feed antibiotic issue at the Second Circuit that it sat at the Second Circuit for 2 years or a year and a half, and they basically, the court didn't come out and say it, but then while it was sitting there at the court, FDA changed its policy and basically mooted the lawsuit. And I wouldn't be, although it's risky to look into any court's motives, I wouldn't be surprised if they aren't waiting to see if Congress can resolve this through preemption and kind of make it to where they don't have to make some tough constitutional decisions on this. Because the thing is having an opinion out there on the First Amendment on this issue could have, depending on how it went, could have reverberating consequences that extend far beyond GMO labeling. And so if a court can find an excuse to not rule on a constitutional issue, they generally take it.
Fair enough. Well, seeing no more questions in our question box, I would like to extend a final thank you both to you, John, and to you, Dr. Gould. Very much appreciate you joining us today and sharing your expertise. And, of course, thank you to all of the attendees for participating in today's webinar. And as a reminder, a recording of today's webinar and the presentation slides will be made available. Our next and, unfortunately, final spring series webinar will be 2 weeks from today on distributed solar energy. You can register for that webinar on ncsl.org at the same page that you registered for this webinar. And again, thank you for your continued interest and support of NCSL. Have a great day and a great weekend. Thanks again, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.